True virtues are supernatural gifts of God, given to his souls. 16 January, 2026 Anno Domini. Official publication of the Holy Apostolic See of Rome, in exile, by His Holiness Pope Jacobus I, on the subject of the supernatural gifts of God, given to those by him who are truly Catholic, as otherwise God resists the proud heretics, the Novus Ordo APOSTATE sectarians, as all of them do lie that they are quote Catholic, unquote, and at the same time believe and profess heretical or apostate false religion that the true Roman Catholic Church, divine institution, the only Church Christ, our Lord had established and founded, has never taught and will never teach. Therefore, as their systemic service to the devil represents extreme danger to the souls of those who do choose to believe these and any other such like excommunicated heretics, or the Novus Ordo APOSTATE sectarians, which evil work is carefully executed by these excommunicated heretics, impostors to the true Catholic Priesthood and Episcopate. Such heretical false doctrines they disseminate are the cause of such heretics falling into, or remaining, in the hands of their master the devil, as the devil is the author of all their fabricated heretical poisons and lies, and thus only the sentence of hell follows them.
Today we are ready to proceed with this publication, which is more of a theological work, and in a way it applies to those who are enemies of the Church, to show in their acts against the Church, how they conduct themselves, that God is not helping them, that truly they are subject and servants, in fact, of the devil, and that the devil is using them for the evil purpose to destroy souls. What you see on the screen is, before we begin actually, is from St. Thomas Aquinas, Doctor of the Church. It's a definition of a heretic, but I would like to read just part of it because it's evident that this applies to today's times more than ever in the history of the Church. Now, so that St. Thomas says, "Now it is manifest that he who adheres to the teaching of the Church as to an infallible rule assents to whatever the Church teaches. Otherwise, if of things taught by the Church he holds what he chooses to hold and rejects what he chooses to reject, he no longer adheres to the teaching of the Church as to an infallible rule, but to his own will. Hence it is evident that a heretic who obstinately disbelieves one article of faith is not prepared to follow the teaching of the Church in all things. But if he is not obstinate, he is no longer in heresy but only in error." But this has to be explained, obviously. How is it? Because if somebody who doesn't know any better, somebody who's learning and all this, as long as he continues in searching the truth, searching for the truth, and God will provide that grace for him, and he will learn what the truth is. And obviously, if it's something that the Church has declared already, established the fact, established the doctrine, then he's bound by divine law to obey the Church and follow it, to hear the Church, as it says. Therefore, it is clear that such a heretic, with regard to one article, has no faith in the other articles, but only a kind of opinion in accordance with his own will. So that means that that person is not willing to submit to the divine law, to the authority of the Church, and establishes his own limitations or his own ends, in fact, of what he will believe or not. And that is not admissible in front of God, and obviously God leaves that soul in the hands of the devil, and the devil takes over, and that person is slave of Satan. That's how bad the situation is, obviously. So we have many times shown this. These are the enemies of the Church. This is from the speech of, and it's recorded confirmed speech of the communist arch-criminal Mikhail Gorbachev to the Soviet military forces in Uzbekistan in 1987. And you can read it for yourself what he says. But in this sense, what we will present today, it applies to all those who are the enemies of the Church, obviously. One way or another, they either serve the devil, and all terms they serve the devil, in fact. But then they have another reason why they are not willing to submit to the authority of the Church, or then why they are, in fact, obstinately refusing to submit. And the evidence of that is that they don't fear God's punishment if they don't belong to the Church. they don't see that as something that is obligatory for them to be truly Catholic in order to save their soul and in order to be subject to the Church in things of matters of faith and morals and church government and discipline and so forth. And obviously then they are on their own, but then since they demonstrate, it's manifestly visible that they are not willing to serve the Church and obey the Church and help the Church to continue her mission of salvation of souls, that they are her enemies. Our Lord says in other places, He says, "He who is not with you is against you." That means that there's no distinction really, and the Church is not really concerned who they are, except for the proper determination of it's a matter of counsel, obviously, how to proceed in such situations and so forth. But not a council as a gathering, but council as an act of will and intellect. But when we have these enemies, to determine who the enemies are, where they serve, and how they are not willing to submit because of what they believe already, what is known about them. And so, in this sense, it is a known fact, historical fact, that the communists have infested the seminaries, even of the Church, and sent their agents to learn the rudiments of the faith and doctrine and so forth in order to get inside the Church and in order to pervert and infiltrate and subvert the Church. And obviously when they started using their own false doctrines, then they were excommunicated as such by doing so. So the Church stands protected. Now in today's time, how that applies to the situation today is really the work of this publication. This is what you're looking at as a screenshot from a study that was published by or republished by the SFPX Heretics, illegitimate assembly of heretics that was never approved by the Church. So they don't belong to the Church and never have belonged to the Church. They are not Catholic, and this is the essential part of the Episcopal consecration, in which they say that is valid for them. That we have just published a very long publication last week about them, and the summary so forth of their heretical evils, and so it's very important that people observe what these people are, avoid them, because they're actually enemies of the Church, to excommunicated heretics, recognizing non-Catholic sect as Catholic hierarchy, which is a horrible abomination and sacrilege in front of God. So this is what you're looking at, is what they claim that Episcopal consecration is, but that's not admissible in front of God, and it's obviously defect of intention, because that's not the Episcopal consecration ceremony that the Church uses, because it requires 3 bishops, although one suffices for validity and is permitted by papal indult. In times past, that was in the history of the Church, that was done for the purpose of like missionary countries and so forth. It was permitted by the Pope, but it's not automatic or anything. They cannot just, unless there's necessity, obviously, in terms of what the true bishops are. But Roncalli in Pistit, who had contacts with Communist Party of Italy, and he has done some other evils. He promulgated in 1962. Is null and heretical. Can read the Pontifical Romanum, book of ceremonies reserved to the bishop, and in this, the main attack against the apostolic succession of the Church is attack against the perversion of and thus invalidating perversion of the Episcopal consecration rite. And so he makes those 3 bishops take turns in imposing hands, which is the matter of that rite. And reciting the correct formula, but then they started claiming that the formula was defined by Pius XII, and obviously they claimed something different. They tried to blame it on Pius XII, which is inadmissible, because then he would burn in hell, because the formula is protected by Council of Trent and by the Church, and even in the Holy Scriptures, recorded in the Holy Scriptures. So, and the teaching of the doctors of the Church, among which is St. Augustine and so forth. So, what the grace of the sacrament is, and the holy orders, that's in St. John chapter 21 and so forth. So we have spoken about this several times. Chapter 20 was 21, 22, 23, something like that. So this is just to illustrate what they're capable of, that they don't have restraint in doing evils, and claiming that such new rites of sacraments are valid, which they are not, obviously. And so we will go to our publication first. We will look at what the Angelic Doctor says on the subject of this. We have prepared sort of a video publication on the subject with that's just screenshots, and then we have the second part of this publication today will be the evidence really on part of the heretics, how they are refusing to submit and so forth. So we have some excerpts that we have prepared, some of us recent, from the excommunicated heretics, to show that they are not only that they obstinately refuse to submit to the church, but that why is it so that the devil is making use of them, and that they truly are serving the devil and destroying souls by asserting these false doctrines, and absolutely their manifest refusal to submit to the valid Code of Canon Law, which is 1917 Code of Canon Law, and the papal doctrines and involved doctrine on matters of faith and morals in regards to papacy and Catholic faith and so forth. So this is something that is extremely important, and video publication that we produced today, because it shows really the essence, the foundation of these horrible things that these heretics are, and why is it so are involved in and are disseminating, and how the devil participates in that. In fact, he's the author of these evils, and therefore those who want to truly save their soul, which outside being truly Catholic is impossible, outside being outside the true Roman Catholic Church, the Holy Mother Roman Catholic Church divine institution, is absolutely impossible to save your soul. So let's go to this.
Saint Thomas Aquinas, Doctor of the Church, Summa Theologiae II, First, Habits, Virtues, Sin, the Devil's Influence over the Soul, in relation to the present time excommunicated heretics and the Novus Ordo APOSTATE sectarians and their inability and manifest refusal to serve God in His true Catholic Church, outside of which there is no salvation.
So this is in regards to virtues. This is we'll just read part of it and explain it in deeper sense, what it means to the present time situation and so forth. The virtue of the speculative intellect are those which perfect the speculative intellect for the consideration of truth. But this is its good work. Now, a truth is subject to a twofold consideration, as known in itself and as known through another. What is known in itself is as a principle and is at once understood by the intellect. Wherefore, the habit that perfects the intellect for the consideration of such truth is called understanding, which is the habit of first principles. He discusses really the general terms and the sense of the understanding, and then he goes to specific details as Summa Theologiae is very specific in this sense. On the subject of the understanding what St. Thomas actually teaches, and what the doctrine is, and what the Church does hold in the sense of what's going on. So this is just the beginning. So we will go to more details and on the subject as we progress in this, but just to show that we like to do it this way, so to show the proper doctrine in the sense of what the meaning of it is. So then it continues, and we'll read again from that. On the other hand, the truth which is known through another is understood by the intellect not at once, but by means of the reason's inquiry, and is as a term. This may happen in two ways. First, so that it is to last on some particular genus. Secondly, so that it is the ultimate term of all human knowledge. And since things that are knowable last from our standpoint are knowable first and chiefly in their nature, Hence, that which is last with respect to all human knowledge is that which is knowable first and chiefly in its nature. And about these is wisdom, which considers the highest causes of stated and so forth. Wherefore it rightly judges all things and sets them in order. I'll see the next screenshot. Because there can be no perfect and universal judgment that is not based on the first causes. But in regard to that which is last in this or that genus of knowable matter, it is science that perfects the intellect. Therefore, these are dealing with the details of the matter that can alter the consideration or alter the outcome. Really, is important to ascertain, to have access to them in order to make the proper determination or judgment of the matter as it is. It's, for example, the matter of the ecclesiastical court, how the person has conducted himself in the sense of the ecclesiastical discipline or on doctrine of the faith and so forth. And to pass judgment, all the details must be known, obviously. But then it's also, that's why he calls it science, that perfects the intellect. Therefore, according to the different kinds of knowable matter, there are different habits of scientific knowledge. Therefore, there is but one wisdom, which is the power of the soul to make the proper determination and the quality of the soul as it is, which is perfected by God, by His infused knowledge, or participation in that, or guidance by divine grace and so forth. Then it continues to reply to objection 1. Wisdom is a kind of science insofar as it has that which is common to all the sciences, is to demonstrate conclusions from principles. But since it has something proper to itself about the other sciences, inasmuch as it judges of them all, and not merely indeed of their conclusions, but even of their first principles, therefore it is a more perfect virtue than science. He goes into determination what is the most important. He goes, that's, as you can see above, it says the intellectual virtues. The point why we are addressing this is that in regards to heretics, that's why the subject is like this, such virtues cannot be developed in them, because that obstacle to that divine grace by which we obtain the knowledge and right use of our reason and intellect comes from God. And obviously, when people are separated from God by adhering to heretical lie, that offends Him, that all heretical lies and the lies in general and all overall, that is, offend Him, because God is the truth essentially. And then so then God is not helping them to make the proper determination on the subject matter or in matters of regards to faith and morals and so forth, and or doctrine of the church, and therefore they are incapable. And we will show in the course of this publication, we have some screenshots on what the role of the devil is on the subject. But because this is 13th century publications, not the print, but the actual work of St. Thomas Aquinas, there was no need for him to discuss that pertaining to or go deeper in the sense of the heresy is the heretics. Although yes, there were heretics even back then, but the severeness of the punishment and their really influence was so limited that the church didn't have to deal with such situations as we have to deal with today, obviously, when we have non-Catholic sect that claims to be Catholic and occupies the vast majority of the church property worldwide, including the Vatican, and we have to go through these publications in truly limited means, obviously, and in our exile and catacombs as we are in, obviously. So then continues, consequently, to state the truth about this matter correctly, these three virtues are not on par. He speaks about the understanding, wisdom and science, obviously. are not on a par with one another, but there is a certain order between them. The same is to be observed in potential wholes, wherein one part is more perfect than another. For instance, the rational soul is more perfect than the sensitive soul, and the sensitive than the vegetal. That is obviously the distinction between a person who is well educated and possesses the understanding correctly from God. Obviously, the spirit of understanding is granted by God for that person to be able to make the proper determinations and seek the truth properly. And then the distinction between such or some people who are either incapable of doing so or unwilling to submit, and or they are heretics outside the church, and that their intellect is clouded, and such virtues are not developed in a sense because they rely on their memory and understanding they obtain from studying the matter, but then it's again not, God is not helping them to come to the proper conclusions unless they read from it, and then even then, to show themselves as the evil trees they are, they will bear evil fruits, because then there's always that defect present in their conclusions, and then they are visible, obviously, that they don't teach the truth, they don't stand for the truth. So that is manifestly visible, and just by observing how people conduct themselves, what they produce, what they say, what they state, what they declare, what they espouse, and obviously also I mentioned what they refuse to submit to, or what they omit purposely in order to persuade their hearers to that false doctrine they espouse in terms of in matters of like heretics or this apostate sect, Novus Ordo. So then it continues as paragraph. For it is thus that science depends on understanding as on a virtue of higher degree, and both of these depend on wisdom as obtaining the highest place, and containing beneath itself both understanding and science, by judging both of the conclusions of science and of the principles on which they are based. As stated above, virtue's habit has a fixed relation to good, and is nowise referable to evil. And when we speak about virtues, that's impossible that there would be virtues in evil. That's impossible. And there's also limits to the soul, that the soul that is involved in evil cannot be virtuous, obviously. It has some good quality, but virtue is perfection, not just a quality. Because the person that is a heretic is already in that evil, involved in the evil towards God, in relations to God, and and justice that God requires us to uphold, and so forth. And in front of Him, that means to adhere to His, what He has revealed about Himself. That means the Catholic faith, which is nothing else but Catholic tradition. So then it continues, now the good of the intellect is truth, and falsehood is its evil. Wherefore those habits alone are called intellectual virtues that tell the truth and never tell a falsehood. But opinion and suspicion can be about both truth and falsehood, and so, as stated in Ethics and so forth, they are not intellectual virtues. He addresses the objection, the point that we are making here, the doctrine that is necessary, is to what is the relations between the disposition of the soul and the limitations or the perversion of the heretics. And why is it so? Why God allows the heretics to fall into these defects and lies, heretical inventions and fabrications and so forth, and how they are incapable of recovery themselves. How that God, if they are sincere, obviously, is trying to strip themselves of that what they believe and seek the truth, then God will help them, provided He foresees that they will persevere in it, and they will be truly worthy of obtaining His mercy. Otherwise, He leaves them to their own misery and blindness. And so, That's just a continuation. The end of virtue, since it is an operative habit, is operation. But that means, as it says, the scriptural reference is evident that we shall all be judged according to our works. Obviously, what have we done in front of God? And the works are expressed in different manner, different ways, but still it's the result of our actions or of the what the product of our intellect is, in fact, and so forth. So, and how it relates to God and His divine law and so forth. This is a very important point right here. This we will read from it because it shows really the involvement of God in the sense of how we address Him, how we honor Him properly, or how we dishonor Him by our disobedience or refusal, as the heretics do, refusal to submit to what He has revealed about Himself, the constraints of the faith and so forth, and morals. And the infidels in this world, how they react to regard God and Himself or disregard His very existence. In fact, the end of virtue, since it is an operative habit, is operation, but it must be observed that some operative habits are always referred to evil as vicious habits. Others are sometimes referred to good, sometimes to evil. For instance, opinion is referred both to the true and to the untrue, whereas virtue is a habit which is always referred to good. And so the distinction of virtue from those habits which are always referred to evil is expressed in the words by which we live righteously, and its distinction from those habits which are sometimes directed unto good, sometimes unto evil, in the words of which no one makes bad use. The meaning is evident. It's just St. Thomas is trying to determine the ability or the limitations otherwise of the soul, how the soul regards certain facts or certain statements or opinions and is able to make a determination about them or put them in practice in a manner that the soul does, and where they stand in front of God, what the proper actually judgment is of that matter in front of God, how God sees that, and whether that stands in front of Him as an act that is good or act that is evil. And actually that's where the virtue itself leads to good, and it is good in front of God, because virtue actually is a conclusion of mind or intellect, and put in practice in the act of will, or in a sense the application of the profession, let's say in the matters of Catholic faith, profession of the faith. And so it's not only that what the act of will is, but also that belief that leads that, and what we espouse as the belief that is proposed by the Church, or what we believe and what makes us Catholic in front of God. And this is absolutely subverted by the heretics, and therefore they are excluded from that because of that defect of their belief, of that error that they espouse, and in fact offend God by it, because they call themselves Catholic and use the holy name of Catholic in order to deceive others by bad example, and or just their negligence to study the truth, to seek the truth, and being satisfied with what heretical falsehood they believe, or that they are members of non-Catholic sect and call themselves Catholic. So St. Thomas goes into these details. They are not pertinent to this publication that much, but it just shows now that highlighted section, the middle section, is important. Lastly, God is the efficient cause of infused virtue, to which this definition applies, and this is expressed in the words which God forms in us without us. If we omit this phrase, the remainder of the definition will apply to all virtues in general, whether acquired or infused. And we don't need to address the last point a little further. And it does relate to what this publication is. It's just that these are necessary steps. We go step by step and gradually to that point that we need to address. And that this continuation, one can make bad use of virtue objectively, for instance, by having evil thoughts about virtue, etc., by hating it or by being proud of it, but one cannot make bad use of virtue as principle of action, so that an act of virtue be evil. That's impossible. That's an important point. How does it relate to heretics again? Well, when they make public pronouncements and defense of their false opinions, heretical opinions, that in itself is not virtuous at all, because the arbiter is the pillar and ground of the truth of the Church. And so when the doctrine of the Church is contradicting their false opinion in matters of faith and morals, then there's no virtue in it what they propose. And therefore they are severed from anything else, and there's no such thing as infused virtue in them, because God will obviously not produce it for them, that He will not supply them with that infused virtue. So then the next point is very fitting to read. Infused virtue is caused in us by God without any action on our part, but not without our consent. This is the sense of the words which God works in us without us. As to those things which are done by us, God causes them in us, yet not without action on our part, for He works in every will and in every nature. But when God wants to perfect the soul, so that the soul is more acceptable to Him, or to reward the soul, and leading the soul to sainthood in times past, in terms of how the saints were perfected by God, that in itself, or by infused knowledge and the virtue, that's what is caused by the divine power, or directly, it can be done directly by God, by through taking possession of the soul, and the soul becomes by participation divine, and then all the attributes of God are immediately in the limitations, obviously, that God permits, but they are, the soul becomes participating in those attributes also, divine attributes of God. But that is very rare. But it has happened before. It was described by the mystical theology, for example, the works of St. John of the Cross and so forth. So we don't need to enlarge on this that much. And so it continues, and this is an important part. Various habits in the virtuous powers of the soul. St. Thomas answers, as we have said above, habit implies a certain disposition in relation to nature or to operation. If therefore we take habit as having a relation to nature, it cannot be in the soul, that is, if we speak of human nature. For the soul itself is the form completing disposition, completing the human nature, so that regarded in this way, habit or disposition is rather to be found in the body by reason of the relation to the soul, than in the soul by reason of its relation to the body. To understand it correctly, so that there's no misunderstanding. It's a little bit complicated what he means by it, but it's evident, it's visible. Then the human nature of itself, without the how the body is structured, how the body is, even in the terms of our brain and so forth, without the human soul, we are incapable of doing such things. Because that, if that was possible, then there would be no need for the human soul, which is infused to the body by God Himself at conception. That's what makes us different from other species, obviously. That's the proof of the Holy Scripture, that we are made to the image and likeness of God, to be able to distinguish between right and wrong, to pass proper judgment and so forth, and so forth, to be capable of good or evil, obviously, by our free will. But then St. Thomas goes into more. That's the highlighted part, the blue color. But if we speak of a higher nature of which man may become a partaker, according to 2 Peter 1st, that we may be partakers of the divine nature, thus nothing hinders some habit, namely grace, from being in the soul in respect of its essence, as we shall state later on, and so forth. But if we take habit in its, we have spoken about this, the infused knowledge and participation of the joy, and God takes possession of the soul completely, which is the highest degree of relations between God and man on the space of during this life. Obviously, it's a foretaste of heaven, and it's not automatic at all. It's a gift of God, the highest gifts of God, really, to human soul, possible in this life. It's a foretaste of heaven, and it's true proof of that soul to be saintly and so forth. Some mystics, they obtained it, obviously. But if we take habit in its relation to operation, it is thus chiefly that habits are found in the soul, insofar as the soul is not determined to one operation, but is indifferent to many, which is a condition for a habit, as we have said above, and so forth. And since the soul is the principle of operation through its powers, therefore regarded in this sense, habits are in the soul in respect of its powers. That what the soul is capable of, he addresses the powers of the soul in the sense of what is the habit in itself, what's the relation between that and the soul and the powers of the soul, what the soul is able to do, and how God helps in that sense, in that regard, what we do, and how the habit itself, either of our in the sense of the human nature, is more in the sense what he says in the above section, that second highlighted, in relation to of body and the soul. It's more like a part of our nature, what God establishes in our ability, our natural powers and so forth, and how that relates to the soul. The meaning of this is all of it clouded in the sense of how we should properly determine what the proper signification of this is. But what we wanted to address in this sense is, again, the inability of the heretics, and that's a true punishment of God, their punishment from God, for producing the right right acts and results at the proper moment when they are called upon, either by divine law, by the laws of faith, by divine command, or by the necessity of the action, which includes acts of charity, obviously. And we speak not on some kind of acquired knowledge of charity, what needs to be done, and then putting in practice by certain heretics and so forth. We speak about the supernatural, the true charity, which is the gift of God, obviously. It's a proof, charity is the proof of the Holy Ghost dwelling in the soul. And that is, obviously, heretics are excluded, or the Novus Ordo sect members are excluded from this. And they are incapable of producing the acts of charity at the right moment when it is required by the circumstances of the situation, because God will not help them to do so unless it's in His will or in His interest, what He wishes that that person of a heretic to do at that moment. For example, to accommodate a member of his church, God forces that enemy of his to produce those good results for that soul in order to accommodate the soul. Happened to us many times during our pilgrimage in circumstances that were thoroughly unbelievable and truly miraculous in the sense of our continuation and so forth, and being supplied by heretics with our necessities that otherwise they would otherwise refuse to. We have such a striking examples that it would this publication would be very long if we started going into the details. So we have certain knowledge of this and experience of what happened, that how our Lord protects His church, and how He supplies the church with the things that we need for for us to continue, obviously, in the service. We still have a little bit left on this because we don't want to make it too long, so we'll continue on. There's some more points of this. We have included some screenshots that are regarding to the relations of the soul and how the devil is hampering, obviously, the soul. Some habits are infused by God into man for two reasons. The first reason is because there are some habits by which man is disposed to an end which exceeds the proportion of human nature, namely the ultimate and perfect happiness of man, as stated above, and so forth. And since habits need to be in proportion with that to which man is disposed by them, therefore is it necessary that those habits which dispose to this end exceed the proportion of human nature. Why is it so? Why is it important? Because those are the deeds of the supernatural qualities, like the apostles were capable of producing, and miracles, obviously, and so forth, which of themselves they were incapable of doing, so God had to help, obviously, and that's what he speaks about, and other such like things that people who are separated from God are incapable of producing, because God will not help them to do so when it belongs to Him to do so in that soul. That's truly the divine work in that soul that produces those works that otherwise the soul is incapable of producing. That's what St. Thomas speaks about. Then in the yellow color, I hear, wherefore such habits can never be in man except by divine infusion, as is the case with all gratuitous virtues. The other reason is because God can produce the effects of second causes without these second causes, as we have said in the first part and so forth. Just as, therefore, sometimes in order to show His power, He causes health without its natural cause, like miracles of healing and so forth, that would be a good example. But which nature could have caused, so also at times for the manifestation of His power He infuses into man even those habits which can be caused by a natural power. It's up to God's determination and goodwill, obviously, when He supplies those things that are in fact wanting in that soul, or that He wishes to grant, even though they are the soul would be otherwise capable by some kind of industry to obtain them. It is more of a general terms, it does not a whole lot of specifics to relate to. But he gives that example of the apostles. Thus he gave to the apostles the signs of the scriptures and of all tongues, which man can acquire by study or by custom, but not so perfectly. Because what God does is supernatural quality and supernatural level of that, what He accomplishes in the soul, and it cannot be surpassed by natural means of man, obviously, because then that would negate the whole distinction between, or difference between us as creatures of God and Him as the Supreme Being. That's evident. Those are the objections of that same article. God, in respect of His nature, is the same to all, but in respect of the order of His wisdom, for some fixed motive, gives certain things to some which He does not give to others. And then another objection, part of objection, that God works in all according to their mold, does not hinder God from doing what nature cannot do, but it follows from this that he does nothing contrary to that which is suitable to nature. So that there would be something that we would not be doing things that would cause us harm or that type of things, or something that would be causing scandal in a certain way. Although there are some extraordinary things that happen, for example, to St. Teresa of Avila. She spoke about it in her books, and she was at Mass, and by miraculous power she was lifted into the mid-air and suspended in the mid-air. The elevation, God caused this for her at the moment that the Mass was produced. Obviously it was going on, and so she couldn't do nothing about it. She tried to cling to the communion rail, and it didn't help because the divine power lifted her up without that. So obviously she couldn't resist, and that's written in her book, obviously. And so, and there were some other situations that the souls, the mystics were writing. So God can do all things. This is nothing that we could question or anything. It was God, but God does is God's will. But again, the separation of the heretics is absolutely excluding such possibilities at all. So then it speaks about the reply to third objection on the bottom. It says, acts produced by an infused habit do not cause a habit, but strengthen the already existing habit, just as the remedies of medicine given to a man who is naturally healthy do not cause a kind of health, but give new strength to the health he had before. This is answer to objection, but we don't read the objection, so it's probably unrelated to what they speak about. It's nice to speak about this also the powers of God himself. Another part, reason is the first principle of all human acts, and whatever other principles of human acts may be found, they obey reason somewhat, but in various ways. For some obey reason blindly and without any contradiction, whatever such are the limbs of the body, provided they be in a healthy condition, for as soon as reason commands, the hand or the foot proceeds to action. Then he speaks about Socrates. We will not get involved in this. There was some false opinion of Socrates that the reason is perfect. Soul rules the body like a despot, as a master rules his slave, who has no right to rebel. According to some held that all the active principles in a man are subordinate to reason in this way, but that's not correct. Socrates, this was the opinion of Socrates, who said, we'll go for a little bit, who has said every virtue is a kind of prudence, as stated in ethics and so forth. Hence, he maintained that as long as a man is in possession of knowledge, he cannot sin, and that every one who sins does so through ignorance. Now, this is based on a false supposition. That's not correct, obviously, because the appetitive faculty obeys the reason, not blindly, but with a certain power of opposition. And there's also the role of concupiscence, and as we see coming up, is the role of the devil in his temptations, and that's very important to observe too. So it's not entirely obviously that the soul has to fight the warfare, spiritual warfare, against these inclinations and the concupiscence of the flesh and so forth. So it's not automatic. So that's definitely false what Socrates held, because the appetitive faculty obeys the reason, but not blindly, but with a certain power of opposition. Wherefore the philosopher says that reason commands the appetitive faculty by a political power. That means that determination and making distinctions and applying them to our acts as they are, the intellect, is sometimes the devil causes a harm to this by sort of subjecting the intellect to his stranglehold and forcing that intellect to act a certain way, and leading the act of the body to cause either harm or cause some kind of evil that would then result in sinning in front of God. But then God never permits the devil to do something that that would cause this kind of harm, and the soul, unless the soul gives consent to such really suggestions of the devil and temptations and so forth, which they would have to be specific in this, but it is possible that the devil causes them, but then the soul is incapable of realizing. As we see, this is coming up. St. Thomas speaks about this also. Hence, St. Augustine says on Psalm 118 that sometimes we understand that what is right, while desire is slow or follows not at all, insofar as the habits or passions of the appetitive faculty cause the use of reason to be impeded in some particular action. And in this way there is some truth in the saying of Socrates that so long as a man is in possession of knowledge he does not sin, provided however that this knowledge is made to include the use of reason in this individual act of choice. Again, in relations to heretics, this is again something that and the role of God obviously in this. So this is all very complex and in general terms, but in relations to heretics, how they conduct themselves, and the role of the devil in them being subject to him, obviously because they are enemies of God by espousing heretical lies. The devil takes over and then he forces them to do evil, even when they try to resist. They cannot resist the devil. He is much stronger than we are, obviously, and God permits that to happen to them in punishment because they are enemies of God by espousing heretical lies and calling them the truth, Catholic faith or something of that nature, and obviously that's an abomination to God. And so, in the sense, we will not go any further into detail because it's a lot more to cover. So we'll skip this and go a little further. Then St. Thomas speaks about virtue in itself. For virtue is a perfect habit by which it never happens that anything but good is done. And so virtue must needs be in that power which consummates the good act. But the knowledge of truth is not consummated in the sensitive powers of apprehension, for such powers prepare the way to the intellective knowledge. And therefore in these powers there are none of the virtues by which we know truth. These are rather in the intellect or reason. He's answering the objections and so forth. Why is it not virtues? Because it speaks, the sensitive appetite is related to the will, which is the rational appetite, through being moved by it. And therefore the act of the appetitive power is consummated in the sensitive appetite. And for this reason the sensitive appetite is the subject of virtue. Whereas the sensitive powers of apprehension are related to the intellect rather through moving it, for the reason that the phantasms are related to the intellective soul as colors to sight. And therefore the act of knowledge is terminated in the intellect, and for this reason the cognoscitive virtues are in the intellect itself or the reason. It is without the, it's hard to imagine what this what it relates to in specifics, because then we would have to go into much more detail in the sense of what it means. But when the soul is being guided by inputs like either memory or reason, and which is the guiding principle of the human intellect as it is. What is the right way to proceed, in other words? Or when we speak about sensitive appetite, that means the senses in itself, they don't lead to to producing virtuous acts, and so far when they are engaged in general acts as we normally do, the daily acts and so forth. But when they produce something that is in itself of value and could be called virtue, then yes, they lead to it. That's why he says, whereas the sensitive powers of apprehension are related to the intellect rather through moving it, which is the influence of the intellect over the senses, is self-evident. That's how we conduct ourselves as human beings. And then he speaks about the relations of the sensitive appetite to the will, which is the rational appetite through being moved by it. Therefore, the act of the appetitive power is consummated in the sensitive appetite. For this reason, the sensitive appetite is subject of virtue in the sense of what is produced, and that the use of that sensitive appetite, it leads to virtue as far as what the accomplishment of that act signifies. And if that accomplishment signifies something that is of value in front of God and is good in itself, then yes, that leads to virtue. In that sense, we'll have to speed up a little bit because we have still a lot to cover. So this is in regards to the devil, and it's important to observe because if we have it's actually still about virtue. Virtue is the utmost limit of power, but the utmost limit is in that of which it is the limit. Therefore, virtue is in the power of the soul. St. Thomas answers that it can be proved that in three ways that virtue belongs to the power of the soul. First, from the notion of the very essence of virtue, which implies perfection of a power. For perfection is in that which it perfects. Secondly, from the fact that virtue is an operative habit, as we have said above, for all operation proceeds from the soul through a power. Thirdly, for the fact that virtue disposes to that which is best, for the best is the end, which is either a thing's operation or something acquired by an operation proceeding from the thing's power. Therefore, a power of the soul is the subject of virtue. That is, again, the results that what we accomplish is determining the actual quality of that act in itself, whether it is a virtuous act or not. We'll not speak about this, but this is self-evident. We don't need to enlarge on this definition of St. Thomas because it's self-evident as he pronounces it as it is, that the power of the soul is actually that the virtue is produced by that soul. And why is it so? Because that the soul is infused by God. Soul is being guided, human soul is being guided by the divine grace, and therefore those virtuous things are sought by God by the very fact that we exist in us by divine grace, provided we cooperate and do not misuse our free will. That's how important it is to observe. Augustine says, no one can doubt that virtue makes the soul exceeding good, and the philosopher says, virtue is that which makes its subject good and its work good likewise. St. Thomas answers, as we have said above, virtue implies a perfection of power, wherefore the virtue of anything is fixed to the utmost limit of its power. Now the utmost limit of any power must needs be good, for all evil implies defect. Wherefore Dionysius says that every evil is a weakness, and for this reason the virtue of each thing must be regarded in reference to good. Therefore human virtue, which is an operative habit, is a good habit, productive of good works. And that's essential to understanding what the second part we have spoken in the beginning of this publication reads to, what the manifest proofs, the evidence of their evils, which is in there what they teach, these heretics, what they propose, what their opinions, false opinions are, heretical opinions. Therefore that is showing their weaknesses in the sense of that it contradicts what the truth is, and is manifestly visible. It is undeniable. It is evil what they do.
The actual power of the devil over the soul, and the doctrine regarding the limits imposed by God on the powers of the devil, and the relations to the soul, and the state of the souls of the heretics, how they are thus affected in regards to the truth and justice, sin, or virtues, etc.
So this is almost the end of this part. So bear with us because it's very important. The devil is St. Thomas says, now all our evil thoughts are incited by the devil. Sometimes they are due, not all our evil thoughts, sometimes they are due to a movement of the free will. And St. Thomas answers that the devil is the occasion and indirect cause of all our sins, insofar as he induced the first man to sin. That means our concupiscence, our separation from the state of innocence, obviously, by that first sin of Adam. That is a great loss to the human nature, obviously. By reason of those, the first man to sin, by reason of whose sin human nature is so infected that we are all prone to sin, even as the burning of wood might be imputed to the man who dried the wood so as to make it easily inflammable. He is not, however, the direct cause of all the devil, that is, cause of all the sins of man, as though each were the result of his suggestion. Origen proves this from the fact that even if the devil were no more, man would still have the desire for food, sexual pleasures, and the like, which desire might be inordinate unless it were subordinate to reason, a matter that is subject to the free will. So we will still be subject, as the proof is in the in the Holy Scripture, in the book of Genesis, how that the free will led our first parents to sin. And although the devil suggested that, but the conclusion, the consent was given by them, by Adam and so forth. Who was not tempted by the devil? Eve was tempted. And but the free will played the role in it, obviously, in that sin. So that's a scriptural reference, obviously. The crowd of demons are the cause of all our evils, as regards their original cause, as stated. A man becomes another's slave not only by being overcome by him, but also by subjecting himself to him spontaneously. It is thus that one who sins of his own accord becomes the slave of the devil. And of course, by negligence, by being heretic willfully, or apostate sectarian, member of the Novus Ordo sect, and all this. That's how the slavery of Satan is accomplished by such people. And it's very sad and very, very serious, obviously. And so, another point. The devil, by his own power, unless he be restrained by God, can compel. This is that the devil cause sin. Unless he be restrained by God, can compel anyone to do an act which in its genius is a mortal sin, but he cannot bring about the necessity of sinning. This is please observe this. This is very important part that is, to make it a little bit bigger so we can read it. Bring about the necessity of sinning. This is a very important part because it shows the limits of the power of the devil and how God is limiting him and actually protects the soul from sinning, from offending God, which is supernatural help of God. Otherwise, the devil would be in control of the whole human race. So the devil is limited in that what he can cause us in the sense of the state of our soul and so forth, and the results of what we do. This is evident from the fact that man does not resist that which moves him to sin except by his reason. That means the knowledge has to be there. The reason that is the consent to evil is the deciding factor of all that, whether that is sin or not. By moving, except by his reason, the use of which the devil is able to impede altogether, by permission of God, that is, by moving the imagination and the sensitive appetite, as is the case with one who is possessed. But then, the reason being thus fettered, whatever man may do, it is not imputed to him as a sin. If, however, the reason is not altogether fettered, then, insofar as it is free, it can resist sin, as stated above. It is consequently evident that the devil can no wise compel man to sin. And so then it continues in next reply to objection 1. Not every power that is greater than man can move man's will. God alone can do this, as stated above. But what is the defense of the soul? This is a very important point. It's the prayer, sign of the cross works, a holy water, true holy water, not some water produced by the heretics, and such like a holy rosary, to fight the devil, obviously. But it has to be true rosary, and there has to be true crucifix on it, and all these kind of things. That means the protection of the soul is hampered by heresy, or denied rather by God and soul. Then another objection for that soul, because that's an enemy, unless God decides to protect the soul against greater evil, in the sense that has to be understood. That which is apprehended by the senses or the imagination does not move the will of necessity so long as man has the use of reason, nor does such an apprehension always fetter the reason. The lusting of the flesh against the spirit, which when the reason actually resists it, is not a sin, but it matters for the but is matter for the exercise of virtue. That reason does not resist, is not in the devil's power, wherefore he cannot bring about the necessity of sinning. To understand this correctly is that when the person is absolutely determined to resist the devil, and the devil obtains permission from God to overcome that soul, and the intellect is suspended by the devil, the soul has the knowledge, uses the reason, but otherwise uses the reason to resist, and to with the knowledge, understanding, that's sin, obviously. The act is committed. It's still because of that attack of the devil against the soul, and the soul incapability of resisting, because God permitted the devil to overcome that soul. That in itself is great merit for that soul. But the devil sometimes withholds that and partially restores that intellect to the soul by permission of God, as everything has to be permitted. This is very, 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 very complicated subject, because of lack of experience of part of those who may be hearing this and so forth. But in itself, it can teach the soul why God permits this, to teach the soul to be careful in matters and conduct in front of him, obviously. But the devil cannot overcome reason, obviously, because then itself that would mean that the soul would be, the human nature, human beings would be totally slaves of Satan, obviously, because if that was possible, that this world will be unbearable to live in, obviously, or would cease to exist if the devil had his way completely, obviously. So the devil, does the devil cause sin? Obviously, the answer is the answer is no on those criteria that were presented already. Go further. The interior part of the soul is intellective and sensitive, and the intellective part contains the intellect and the will. That's the higher part of the soul. As regards the will, we have already stated what is the devil's relation thereto. Now the intellect of its very nature is moved by that which enlightens it in the knowledge of truth, which the devil has no intention of doing in man's regard. Rather does he darken man's reason so that it may consent to sin, which darkness is due to the imagination and sensitive appetite. That means the lower parts of the soul. And the devil can be successful in there because of the inclinations or concupiscence or insufficient upbringing and so forth of that, or weakness of the soul, obviously. Consequently, he says, St. Thomas says, consequently the operation of the devil seems to be confined to the imagination and sensitive appetite, by moving either of which he can induce man to sin. For his operation may result in presenting certain forms to the imagination, and he is able to incite the sensitive appetite to some passion or other. The reason of this is that, as stated in the first part, the corporal nature has a natural aptitude to be moved locally by the spiritual nature, so that the devil can produce all those effects which can result from the local movement of bodies here below, except he be restrained by the divine power. Now the representation of forms to the imagination is due sometimes to local movement, for the philosopher says that when an animal sleeps, the blood descends in abundance to the sensitive principle, and the movements descend with it, with the impressions left by the action of sensible objects, which impressions are preserved by means of sensible species, and continue to move the apprehensive principle, so that they appear just as though the sensitive principles were being affected by them at the time. Hence such a local movement of the vital spirits or humors can be procured by the demons, whether man sleep or wake, and so it happens that man's imagination is brought into play. The devil takes possession of that by permission of God. You can read the rest of it. We have to cover the rest of this. We still quite a bit to deal with. But there's no sin, because that intellect is clouded by not being fully in possession of the faculties. The human soul is not entirely able to fully control, and the reason is not engaged in the sense for that protection, because for example, this happens quite often, and the soul is waking up, person is waking up, and so the devil quite often takes advantage of it, and incites the soul to sin. But there's no sin because that apprehension is not there, and the devil can attack the soul by causing it to the intellect to be suspended, or at least to be hampered to realize that the person is incapable of realizing that that's a sin. Actually, the conclusion is not granted by God. That's how God protects, or rather allows the soul to fight the warfare without the soul perceiving it, or the perception is clouded of what it truly means, what that act itself means. This is very complicated in a sense, but we would like to cover it because it relates to what this publication is about, and the examples of the heretics, how the conclusion of this is that they're doing it willfully. It's evident that they want to attack the church, and that they don't want to serve God. That's why they are capable of producing these false doctrines and false conclusions and so forth. And devil makes use of them, obviously. Another, in regards to this subject, although vital functions are always from an intrinsic principle, yet an extrinsic agent can cooperate with them, even as external heat cooperates with the functions of the vegetal soul, that food may be more easily digested. It's objection. We have not read the objection, what it is. But in regards to the devil can act on the body so that he can force the body to act as the devil wills. In such regards, whether God permits that to happen, that something evil can be produced if God permits something like this, and or to lead that body to be subject to the will of the devil, and to cause harm or some kind of act that could lead to harm if not restrained, obviously, or that soul is not protected fully, or usually what happens, God protects the soul to the point that there's no harm done. These were the trials of the saints, and so forth, which are described elsewhere, so this is no need to address this at this point. This apparition of imaginary forms is not altogether outside the order of nature, nor is it due to a command alone by according to local movement, as explained above, so forth. So that should be sufficient. We still have a couple more. This is important. That's the last one, actually. Consequently, neither the thing offered from without, nor he that proposes, nor he that persuades, is the sufficient cause of sin. Therefore, it follows that the devil is a cause of sin, neither directly nor sufficiently, but only by persuasion or by proposing the object of appetite. All these and other like authorities, if we meet with them, are to be understood as denoting that the devil induces man to affection for a sin, either by suggesting it to him or by offering him objects of appetite. Then he replies to another objection, St. Thomas. This comparison is true insofar as the devil is somewhat the cause of our sins, even as God is in a certain way the cause of our good actions, but does not extend to the mode of causation. For God causes good things in us by moving the will inwardly, whereas the devil cannot move us in this way, because we have to give consent to him, to his suggestions, to his evil suggestions or temptations and so forth. But otherwise, no. But in that case, the sin is consummated, obviously, to give consent to the devil and his evils. If it's in itself, in its nature, evil act or evil thought or that thing, to give consent to it is already sinning, means sinning in front of God. God is the universal principle of all inward movements of man, but that the human will be determined to an evil counsel is directly due to the human will and to the devil as persuading or offering the object of appetite. When that is admitted or consummated and so forth, then the devil actually disturbs the soul to the point of causing the soul to sin. So we thus come to our next. This is the montage and so forth that we will present as the proof of how the heretics are leading themselves away from God, away from salvation, and that their conduct is it's that the devil doesn't have that much of a hard work with them, because they are not, their intention is not to be Catholic, evidently, and therefore they are in no wise inclined to amend, to convert, to become truly Catholic, because that stronghold of that heretical lie is so strong over them that they continue defending it and continue proposing it and disseminating it, or seeking other angles of the same heretical lie to be introduced by them, so that others could be subverted and perverted, obviously, and led to sin. It's true. That's why the Holy See has to produce these. That's why we are so busy in this sense, because of their fluctuations in those heretical lies, and or increase, in fact, in some aspect of what they produce, what they disseminate, what they publish, and so forth. And it's the role of the Church to condemn it, obviously, which we do by apostolic authority.
A montage of excerpts from heretical publications of the excommunicated heretics, presenting the manifestly evident proofs that their souls are perverted and separated from God, and that they do serve their master the devil instead, and evidently they are thus destroying souls, willfully, Avoid them all at all cost.
We are Roman Catholics. This is our true name. Nevertheless, we have to witness today something very terrible. The fact that this rock is under siege, that there are people occupying the throne of Peter who are in fact, in reality, destroyers of the Church. They've attacked the faith first in the Second Vatican Council, changing the holy doctrine of the Church.
That's a heresy. What he says. This is Pierre Roy. He's from Canada, from Quebec. He was part of the SSPX heretics. He's not a bishop because that's the so-called succession of Da Silva and what was his name? Dolan. So SSPX heretic, and we have shown this in our publications on the subject of sedevacantism and so forth. He's a sedevacantist heretic. You can see by visually observing that he wears the wrong color vestments. We don't have gold color. So then he's preaching the sermon. He has the manifold, which is usually taken down and put on the missal. We don't know what kind of missal or Romanum this is, but just by looking at it, which is right next to us right here, it doesn't look like the old style, so we don't know. It looks like one of the new prints, the 1962, but we don't know it. That's just kind of hard to say, but it is normally not done like this. But I don't know, maybe it is. Nevertheless, this what he says, there was never. In the history of the Church, there was only one Council of the Vatican, under Pope Pius IX, our predecessor of blessed memory, 1869 to 1870 Anno Domini. What they assembled in 1962, in fall of 1962, was never Council of the Church, because by then they were excommunicated, because they gave consent to Roncalli, what he did to how he promulgated Pontifical Romanum that contains erroneous and invalid rites of episcopal consecration. Other such like things we have not yet had chance, due to the overwhelming amount of work that we have to go through and so forth. So to consider other changes in there, but that we are fairly positive that there are some other introduced. But this was the main thing when they attacked the apostolic succession. That means to attempt to destroy the episcopal consecration right of episcopal consecration, which then therefore is invalid after that, because we have explained this in the beginning of this publication. Why is it so? But so that's the proof that the intellect is not being guided by God, obviously. So he's serving the devil, as we have explained in his publication. So that's just a continuation of their what they suggesting, and now we will come to what he suggests in the rest of what he thinks that the solution could be to this problem of the non-Catholic sect sitting in the Vatican, which instead of realizing that's a non-Catholic sect, those people automatically are excommunicated. They don't belong in the Church. They have no authority in the Church. They don't have any clerical office in the Church. They do not possess the papacy, so they cannot dictate any of this. And so therefore what they do is purely their own, and those who are truly Catholics, they have to be born not to have anything to do with such people. And that's why these heretics are who they are, heretics, excommunicated, because they teaching something that the Church would never teach, does not teach. We have condemned this horrible sect and condemned their works and their so-called liturgy, which is not a mass and so forth. So it's manifestly visible, obviously, that their doctrines of these heretics are heretical and therefore lead to hell, and you have to avoid them at all costs. So continue.
We've attacked the sacraments of the Church one after the other, making them very likely invalid for many of them, especially the rite of episcopal consecration. They've attacked the Mass. They've destroyed the Mass as much as it can be destroyed. Mass was preserved by the grace of God, but they've destroyed in the public worship the one that is recognized everywhere as being the Catholic liturgy. They've destroyed the Catholic Mass. So much so that Archbishop Lefebvre would speak of the Mass of Luther. When he would speak of the new Mass, he would speak of the Mass of Luther. That is a Protestant Mass. That is not to say that those who have...
You cannot be saying such thing. That's a incomparable, inadmissible statement as it is. There's no such thing as using the term Mass and with the prefix of Protestant. That's impossible. So you cannot be saying something like this. That's just to correct this, because it's just not inadmissible, obviously. It's a Protestant ceremony. It's a Protestant heretical falsehood. Protestant heretical reenactment of the Last Supper, which is not a Mass. That's not a sacrifice to God. And so the true holy sacrifice of the Mass is reenactment of the sacrifice of the cross of Calvary. That's why the priest has to face the altar, not the people standing behind the table, and have the table between him and the people. That's no longer a priest. That's an impostor, and obviously it's a sacrilege. And that's Montini had. They don't say this quite often. We have shown this so many times. Montini had 6 Protestant ministers in helping him to concoct this horrible thing. That's Voityal kissing the Quran and so forth. That's public apostasy right there in front of you. So, and he's dressed in a white cassock. He was never valid pope. And that's Montini with 6 Protestant ministers, and Montini was never valid pope, because by then they were heretics. So, and this was 1969. So by then he perverted so many things. He's paying for it in hell. They cannot absolve themselves. They don't have the authority to faculties to absolve themselves, because these are crimes of heresy and apostasy. That's excommunicable offense, Canon 2314, 1917, Code of Canon Law. Moreover, they lack any authority to elect the Pope. So there's no open door for anything, except they are condemned and they're paying for it in hell. So we can't be calling it the Mass. That's impossible. And that's why we have to, again, address this, because it's obviously a heretical falsehood and not true.
I've attended this Mass for many years. I've not received blessings and consolations from God, because God is almighty. God can carry His grace, can give His grace to all souls of goodwill, no matter how deceived they can be now, no matter how fooled they can be by the new religion. And what I wanted to carry to my brothers, bishops and priests, is how long is this situation going to last?
He said something about God can do all things. Yes, He can carry the grace, but they have to have the disposition of the soul has to be that the soul wants to be Catholic, truly Catholic. But on part of heretics, this is inadmissible, because they are refusing to be Catholic. They are refusing to belong to our Lord's Church, which is this Holy See, represented today, representing the whole Church, obviously, because people are not converting. And so you cannot be saying such things. God, of course, supplies the necessary grace for that soul to function in the natural way, and the daily necessities and so forth, to accomplish those, so that the human race can continue. But in a sense of salvation, of practicing the faith, which is nothing else but Catholic tradition, the true faith that God has revealed, God does not help people who are His enemies, who are heretics, or apostate sectarians. So no, that's not correct answer, a correct statement from this heretic. So that's the proof that God is not helping these people to teach the truth, to stand for the truth. That means they are not virtues that they produce. And they are incapable of converting themselves. And they don't fear God's punishment. He will visit them with that punishment, because what they're causing to those who otherwise would be converted and become truly Catholic and be able to save their soul. That's truly the true foundation of all this. Why we are publishing this today, because to give that manifold example the contradiction or the distinction that is visible in what they teach and what we teach, in the sense of what the Church always taught and what the Church must teach and will teach by the assistance of the Holy Ghost that is in us.
In front of such an apostasy, as we can easily understand, the flock of Christ has been dispersed. Here and there has been people resisting the revolution of Vatican II, the revolution of the new church, but there was no unity. There was rather everybody is, and it's still the case today, quite scattered. There is no link of the faith to gather us into unity. So
even that is not true statement. Yes, there is a link, but you have to submit to it. That means it's called Catholic tradition. And you have to be part of the Church. You have to be absolved of your sins, including crimes of heresy. That cannot be accomplished by somebody who otherwise would be in good standing, unless that person, that priest and higher, would have the faculty from the Holy See, because this is reserved sin to the judgment of the Holy See. Crimes of heresy, apostasy, and schism, that's automatic excommunication, especially reserved to the judgment of the Holy See. That's Canon 2314, and we have shown this many times before. Why is it so? So when people don't reflect on this, that the crime is committed in front of God, and so the guilt remains, and there is no recovery possible without the true sovereign pontiff, who grants that pardon upon sincere conversion and amendment and being examined, observation of heresy and profession of faith and so forth, as it is required by church law on the subject. Then they don't accomplish anything, because they remain as these people that just they have no problem conducting themselves in this. It's evidently willful, wrong color vestments, wrong statements leading to heresy, recognition of non-Catholic sect, at least in some way, of causing harm to church. No, that's impossible that such thing happens. The harm cannot be caused inside the church, because the sect is outside, is excluded, excommunicated, and so such harm cannot be caused by someone who is already outside the church. The harm is caused by the external circumstances that exist, that we have to suffer under, like them controlling the proper places that it's our property, obviously, and so then we cannot then make use of them to help conversion of souls and to fulfill our mission of salvation of souls, which the church has from God, but that's the consequence. But not that they don't belong with the church, this horrible sect or these heretics. So what he said is just not correct. That's the consequence of what we have stated. That's why we did the first part, obviously, to show the proper rules as God establishes them for our human souls to live by them. And if they are not part of the church, then they are excluded from those benefits and from that proper guidance and proper conduct, because the virtues are not there, obviously, and they are the proof of that good in itself that is produced by the soul. And if that soul is producing evil, there's no virtue in it.
In front of such a destruction, there's been different reactions. But obviously, everybody looks forward and is asking himself the question, what is the solution for this crisis in the church? What is it that is going to happen? How long are we going to be under the yoke of these impostors who are destroying the church of our Lord Jesus Christ? So
he said, how long can we be under the yoke of people whom he's supposed to say they are excommunicated because they profess something that is not Catholic and call it Catholic, and they don't have any cleric office in the church? This is the proof that they are heretics. That's complete disregard of the constraints of the divine law, canon law. They don't possess any cleric office. There's no apostolic sect. They don't have any cleric offices. They don't have valid ordinations. They don't have valid episcopal consecrations. They have nothing. There's no apostolic succession in that sect. So they don't have anything, so he cannot be saying Christ is in the church. That's a heresy to begin with. And he cannot be saying that under the yoke of this horrible sect. He's not using the term of sect. So that's why you know that this is the consequence of their service to the devil. This is true, and it's willful. It's willful omission of those constraints that otherwise they would have to disclose if they were truly serving God. This is the proof of them being evil trees bearing evil fruit. That's how important it is to observe the proper doctrine of the church and avoid these intentionally disseminated false doctrines of these heretics, and avoid their assemblies at all costs.
Some people have said we must wait for divine intervention. We must wait for divine intervention. Some people have been waiting for this for 70 years, and I agree that divine intervention is needed. The situation is so disastrous that divine intervention is needed.
But again, we have spoken about this in our publications on the heresy of sedevacantism. Why is it so? Well, because this leads to heresy, and it is heretical what he said. Because God had to intervene at that moment. He had to intervene when they severed themselves. That there was direct attack of the devil against the church, and such a horrendous attack that God had to preserve the papacy, and he did. Otherwise, there would be the doctrine of the Vatican Council on the Pope Pius IX or Presses of Blessed Memory would be not true. That's infallible doctrine, under the sentence of anathema if you disobey it. That Blessed Peter has unceasingly perpetual line of successors in the primacy of the universal church. That's the doctrine, and so he just denied it because by saying these things, what he just did. Divine intervention did already occur. Otherwise, there would be no continuation, no possible recovery at this point for the whole human race because of the constraints of the canon law. And that's reserved to the judgment of the Holy See, of the true Sovereign Pontiff. And so if there was no true Sovereign Pontiff, there would be no recovery possible. That's Paul's reason and the church law, obviously. And these heretics are disregarding it. That's why they are heretics. And that's why what we have published in the first part is so important. So let's go further.
In a certain manner, but even though some of these things might happen, what I'm trying to say here is that never in the church did we wait forever until God would directly intervene and fix the problems of the church. Some other people have elaborated a very complicated explanation for the situation of the church. It is a man called Bishop Gérard des Lauriers, you might have heard of his name, Bishop Gérard des Lauriers, was trying to explain the situation of the church. How is it possible that what we have under our eyes is happening? Bishop Gérard des Lauriers was an intelligent man. He was a teacher at the seminary of École of Archbishop Lefebvre. He was a teacher, and he was regarded by Archbishop Lefebvre and all the clergy under his guidance as a very intelligent man. And prior to that, he was holding very important positions in Catholic universities in Rome. Father Gérard des Lauriers was an intelligent man. Nevertheless, he elaborated a complicated situation, saying that these people had been elected legally, so according to the law, but nevertheless did not have the authority of our Lord Jesus Christ to rule the church because they were modernists, they were not Catholic actually. And Bishop Gérard des Lauriers said, my explanation is going to disappear with time. Eventually we'll have to consider this church, this new church, as being a completely different church than the Catholic Church, because these men who are not real popes are going to nominate cardinals who are not going to be real cardinals, and therefore will have no power whatsoever to elect a Catholic pope. So I'm not willing to go too deep into theology today, but I want you to know that this is another explanation that has been given. And people who follow this explanation are saying today that the only solution to the crisis of the church today is the conversion of some modernists, some...
Yeah, but that's not true. That's a set of probation of heresy. That's completely condemned. Again, he's not saying that in that. He's not saying that's condemned already by the church. It's a heretical proposition that the church has condemned. That's under the Vatican Council again. There's no such thing as separation of material possession of the power. Moreover, cum ex apostolatus officio, apostolic constitution of our predecessor, blessed memory, Paul IV, 1559, Anno Domini, completely nullifies of such elections. So they are already heretics. They cannot assemble in valid conclave. So what he just said, instead of saying Gerardo Loria was a horrible heretic, and what he proposed is inadmissible, is absolutely preposterous, it's a heretical demagoguery, which it is. He's just saying that's just a half truth. It's just not. It's not. He's not even saying all this, which he is required to say. So that means that the divine grace is not there with him. Obviously, that's why we published the first part of this. And so that this is work of the devil, truly work of the devil, deception. That's what it is.
The Vatican need to convert. They need to gather into a council, and they need to throw out the impostors, the modernists. But this solution that is being put forward is a solution that makes the salvation of the church, makes the solution to this crisis rest in the hands of the heretics, in the hands of those who do not have the Catholic faith. And this, in the history of the church, has never happened. Never was it the modernists, the heretics, who brought a solution to the various crises in the church. It was always the little remnant of the faithful Catholic who would, by the grace of God, with the help of God, bring forth a solution to the crisis in the church. And this is
again, he's disregarding the canon law. This is such a horrendous crime. What these people are capable of. This is something that is inadmissible. It's absolutely preposterous that he actually goes there. They are changing their voice, though, their tone, we should say. But that's Canon 23:14 right here. Excommunication is ipso facto, that is reserved to the Holy See speciale modo before all apostates from the Christian faith, which is nothing else but Catholic tradition, and all heretics and schismatics. Canon 23:14, 1917 Code of Canon Law. And then we have this. That's from Canon Espachova, and that's the commentary on it from 1918. The crime of apostasy, heresy, or schism must be exteriorly manifested either by words, writings, or acts which betray defection from the Christian Church, denial of some article of faith, and so forth. The censure inflicted is excommunication incurred ipso facto, automatic, which per se requires not even a declaratory sentence. So there's no such thing as counsel. Imperfect counsel doesn't exist in the church. No matter how they dealt with this in times past, the church possesses what is now. We can go back to the Great Western Schism and start, because back then there was not the question of heresy. There was question of disagreement between who is the valid pope, who is not, obviously. But the faith remains the same. Today the situation is much worse. We have non-Catholic sect sitting in a place where the true Sovereign Pontiff, us at the present time, should be sitting, and we have no access to that place. That means the Vatican, and ruling the church is from the catacombs, and the church is very small right now. Why? Because they are all accepting, the rest of the world is accepting this horrible sect as Catholic, and it is not. And so then we have to deal with these heretics who are leading people to hell. So then there's no recovery possible. To speed up a little bit, we still have quite a bit left.
This is where the third solution is coming in, which is a solution that has been defended by St. Robert Bellarmine and many other theologians before Vatican II. When there's a crisis in the church, when there is a problem with the one who claims to be the Pope, whether that he is a doubtful Pope, we don't know exactly if he is a real Pope, or that he is suspected of heresy, as can sometimes happen. Never did theologians prior to Vatican II say, in that case there is only one solution, which is direct divine intervention. God needs to come down from heaven and fix our problems. Never did any of them say that the thesis of Bishop Gérard Deslauriers was a solution, that we needed to wait for the conversion of the heretics so that the church could be put back on its feet. But many of them said what needs to be done in such a situation, the church needs to call together an imperfect general council. That is, what is an imperfect general council? An imperfect general council is a council without the Pope. It is a gathering of the Catholic bishops precisely to deal with a problem that is happening at the head of the church. But nevertheless, an imperfect general council is a gathering of all the bishops and priests and superiors of religious order, all people influent in the clergy in the world, to deal with the situation of the church. And this, I believe, is the solution that needs to come in the church. One way or the other, one day the church will have to gather and will have to deal with this situation.
So he disregards the constraints of the canon law, obviously. That's on the bottom right here. There can be no general council unless it is convoked by the Roman Pontiff, canon 222. And then to destroy the sort of privationist heresy, canon 219, that's above on the top. The Roman Pontiff, after his legitimate election, obtains at once, from the moment he accepts the election by divine right, the full power of his supreme jurisdiction. And that's not Pope Pio's instruct at all, because that's a false religion. They have no authority to elect the Pope. Such gathering is not conclave at all, and that's why they are excommunicated. And so we have shown this before. That's from Conrad Pachoven, the canon 228, and so it is truly important to observe that when we speak those in a sense of what these heretics are producing, we are short of time, so we have to improvise a little bit. Then they are omitting these important parts, that the important doctrine that needs to be disclosed, otherwise that true priest or bishop would not be leaving out, because it's for the protection of the souls of the faithful, obviously. Conciliary decrees have no obligatory force unless they are ratified by the Roman Pontiff and promulgated by his command. So you cannot have imperfect council and with people who are not cardinals, that's the law of the church. So for a valid conclave, they have to be true cardinals. So we cannot be electing the Pope with the use of somebody who claims to be bishop. Moreover, these are all heretics. But setting it aside, so they don't possess their kaikov. So this heretic is completely disregarding the constraints that exist, the protection, in fact, of the church. Should the Roman Pontiff die during the canon 229, die during the council, the later is suspended until the new Pontiff gives orders to resume and continue it, and so forth. Then there's another one right here. This is something that is fundamental part canon law, and so there cannot be proposal contrary to it. It's impossible, because that's heresy, because it is the denial of the authority of the church, magisterial authority, and through the doctrine of the church, but magisterial authority of the church that promulgated it. That is heretical. Hence, no appeal is possible from the Pope to an ecumenical council. To admit such an appeal would, moreover, be tantamount to maintaining that a council can appeal to itself, since a general council is unthinkable without the supreme head. Wherefore Pope Zosimus 418 Anno Domini justly wrote to Aurelius, Bishop of Carthage, that the authority of the Apostolic See is so great that no one can revise its sentences, and so forth. So, heretics serve the devil, their master, inventing new and fabricated heretical canonical lies and false doctrines. That's self-evident. We just presented it. So, and also disregard of the constraints of the canon law. These and any other heretics, as they are all excommunicated, do not have any authority nor the true clerical office in the Roman Catholic Church, and so any such attempt of convoking their, even if they call it imperfect, doesn't make any difference, quote, council, unquote, is automatically null and utterly worthless, and the Catholic Church remains protected by God and by her canon, etc. laws. And there's no opening door for this to assert compromise or something like that.
Well, my edition is just a study edition, Your Excellency, but you have an edition of the documents that has Protestant commentary. And so we might say, well, how is His Excellency reacting as a Catholic? But yours has commentary from a Protestant to each of the documents. And you noted that the Protestant had some interesting responses to this document in particular.
Yes, this is a Protestant minister, I believe. And this is from 1964, this book. He says, moreover, instead of dogmatically insisting, so this is the way it was taken by a Protestant, and that's exactly what it says.
Heretics Hamborn. What can you expect from such people? They have there's no. How can you quote a heretic and follow his opinions, no matter how correct they are, if they are correct? In this case, they are not, obviously, but that, moreover, to go into discussions about what they supposed to reject as that was never counsel of the church to begin with, because by then they were excommunicated. That's like saying we accept those changes and deny the teaching of the church in regards to changing the sacraments and so forth. And that, of course, is inadmissible. That's not what the church allows, something like this. So that's why we cut it short. Obviously, we don't want the people to hear that something like this is allowed and all this. So that's why he's a heretic. That's this Samborn. That's the proof that the devil rules him.
I often wondered what the continual mention of the Pilgrim Way in the document referred to. My instinct told me it was modernist drivel, connoting meeting and praying with heretics. Is there any more to it than that?
The Pilgrim Church is something concocted by Paul VI. That means we are constantly moving. That is constantly evolving, and we're finding new things. Leo said something recently about that we don't possess the truth. We're always searching for it. And
instead of saying this, quoting this is quoted by St. Paul, obviously, 1 Timothy. That thou mayest know how thou oughtest to converse in the house of God, which is the church of the living God, the pillar and ground of of truth. So there's no such thing as pilgrim church. That's just another proof of this. True gifts, true virtues of supernatural gifts of God given to His souls. That's self-explanatory that heretics are excluded, obviously. So what he just said is just illustrating that he has no fear of God, what God will do to him for these kind of assertions, and omitting these important parts that has to be important doctrine has to be shown. We have to skip this. We can stop this and read this. This is in regards to that's from our Preces Basimori Pope Eugenius Port, Council of Florence. outside the church there's no salvation, and no one whatsoever is almsgiving he has practiced, even if he has shed blood for the name of Christ, can be saved unless he has remained in the bosom and unity of the Catholic Church. So that's a dogma of the Church, Denzinger 714.
That and religious liberty are the principal sources of heresy in that council.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting, even for those who are objecting in the chat, that the major problems in this document are not a problem for people. It just somehow can be explained away. But if you look at it, as you say, almost the entire council is represented in this document, the entire thrust of the council, all the directions they wanted to go, and it's directly in contradiction to what, and as the Protestant noted in your commentary, completely contra to what his experience of the church had been.
Yes.
State of somebody, because in order to judge somebody, you have to have knowledge and authority over them. This is the whole problem with sedevacantism. People are passing judgment about the Holy Father's doctrinal statements about his interior state regarding them, not the statements themselves, because we do have an obligation to take a look at those. But when we're talking about the actual interior state, they don't have the authority over this man to be passing judgment like this. And that's what declaration of heresy actually is. It's a passing of judgment on the obstinacy, which is an interior state of the individual.
That's not true. That's absolutely fabricated. What he just, this horrible apostate did. This was Novus a sectarian. He's quite a fairly known among those circles, but you don't really pay attention to what they said. This was fitting what we observed. We rarely use them for any kind of, because there's no need. They don't belong with the church, obviously. But what you just said, that's not true. That's just the illustration that there's no grace of God with them, and but he just said that's not passing judgment on the interior. That's impossible. That belongs to God, but outwardly visible. That means it's manifested. We have read the constraints of the canon 2314, so it means that it's a manifest heresy. Then that person is not in possession of excommunicated office. Moreover, this is false religion. They have Protestant, heretical, enactment of the Last Supper. That's how we recognize them. So, and this person, they don't have, they lack authority to elect the Pope. So that person is not elected the Pope. Period. So yes, it rested solely and wholly in the hands of God, because by then there were no, for that to elect the Pope you have to have true cardinals, not somebody who claims to be cardinal, but true cardinals named by true Pope. And so when they became heretics, when they gave consent to Roncai, what he did to sacraments, Pontifical Romanum, that is not valid, and changing the Mass to the point that it is invalid. But then he lost the papacy, because as being heretic you cannot retain the papacy. It's impossible. It's against divine law and church law, obviously. And so then yes, automatic loss of office, canon 188 for number 4. So because of heresy. And so election of a heretic by heretics is null. There's no such thing that those people possess any office in the church. So we explained this. So that's not judging entirely at all. That's bearing witness to the truth that is manifestly visible. They are heretics, regardless. They profess heretical, non-Catholic religion that is not Catholic, and they are excommunicated for that very purpose, for that very reason. So what he just said, this Rieberger, is just invention of his. That's just his useless and heretical defense of indefensible apostate sect, obviously. If he doesn't understand what the word apostasy means, apostasy from the Catholic faith, then he should look at himself, because he was brought up in that sect, and even so-called ordained. No matter how many times he claims to be traditional, whatever that means to them, we don't have that term in the church. Because you either are Catholic or you are not Catholic. If you don't practice the Catholic faith, which is nothing else but Catholic tradition, that you are not Catholic, are you excommunicated by that very fact, no matter what excuse you come up with. Because it's your obligation put forth by God Himself, that's under divine law, that you have to be truly Catholic. And that means we have to practice a faith that God has revealed about himself, which means the New Testament faith, which means Catholic tradition, nothing else.
Amen. Confiteor Dei Omnipotenti, Beata Maria Semper Virgini, Beata Michael Arcangelo, Beata Ioanne Baptiste, Sanctus Apostolus Petro and Paulo, Omnibus Sanctus et Tibi Pater, Quia peccabilis cogitationem verbo et opere, mea culpa, mea maxima culpa, ideo precor Beata Maria Semper Virginum, Beata Michael Arcangelo, Beata Ioanne Baptiste, Sanctus Apostolus Petro and Paulo, Omnes Sanctus et Te Pater, ora pro mea Domini Deus.
Miserere nostre, Deus. Et mistis peccatis vestris perugat vos et vitanus arenam.
Amen.
Indulgentiam absolutionem et remissionem peccatorum nostrorum. Tribua nobis omnipotens misericors Dominus.
Amen.
Deus tu conversus vivificabis nos.
Et plebis tu lotare vitorente.
Nostene nobis Domine, misericordiam tuam.
Et salutare tuam Dominus.
Domine exaudi rationem meam.
Et clamor meas a te veniam.
Dominus vobiscum.
Et cum spiritu tuum.
Oremus. Et advenit Dominator Dominus et regnum in manueus et potestas et imperium. Deus tu conversis vivificabis nos.
Et plebis tu lotare vitorente.
Ostende nobis Domine misericordiam tuam.
Et salutare tuum Dominus.
Domine exaudi rationem meam.
Et clamor meas.
Dominus vobiscum.
Et cum spiritu tuum.
Oremus. Et advenit Dominator Dominus, et regnum in manueus et potestas. Deus tu conversis vivificabis nos, et lex tu alitabi turinte. Ostende nobis Domine misericordiam tuam, et salutari tuum da nobis. Domine exaudi rationem meam, et clamor meus et te veniat. Dominus vobiscum, et cum spiritu tuum. Oremus. In nomine Jesu, omnium genuflectatio, celestium, terrestrium, et infelorum.
There's simply no way, such a short period to recite those prayers. There are two prayers. And he's just not reciting them. He says something, mumbles, you can hear something in the beginning, but that's about it. When he goes to the altar, it says Oremus, and he's supposed to recite prayer. And the prayer is not very short. So it takes about 10 seconds, maybe longer, and the other one about the same. So when he kisses the altar and all this, so that it's just they cutting it off. That's the indication that the person doesn't have the fear of God. What he does to, and those are important prayers. Obviously, the priest is not free to remove the prayers and just not recite them. Obviously, so that's how you know that that person is enemy of God. Obviously. Zapera, please observe this. We are running out of time, but we still have like less than 2 minutes.
Obedience is one of the main ones. And I want to explain why. Every time that you obey, you teach your will to act upon reason. And there are two things that can guide your will. One is your reason, in which case your will do perfect good things. The other one is your lowest passions, in which case your will lead you to disaster and to destroy yourself. You go and look at all the teenagers. I have it against teenagers in the last couple of Sundays. No kidding. You go and look at all our young people today in the high schools, in colleges. What is the problem? They have strong will, but for their lower passions. And they'll pursue their lower passions with furious strength, and they destroy themselves. What prevents that? Obedience. Obedience is the virtue that since you're a child until you become.
They are not Catholic. They do not belong with the church. How can there be obedience in any way or whatsoever? And obedience to evil, that's asserted, but obviously that's not the virtue of obedience, because then if you follow false or bad example, then you sin in front of God. What is he saying in this sense? And then the definition that he gave, and that's not entirely correct either. That's why we have spent half of this publication, of over half, in explaining this, the doctrine of St. Thomas Aquinas, applying it to the senses of the situation as it is today. He speaks about heretics, he speaks about infidels, people who don't colleges. How can you assert something? There are no Catholic colleges, and everything else he should address this in the sense that they are illegitimate, because the teaching authority belongs to the church. So these people outside the church, they have their education, but that's leading to hell. So please observe what he says next. That's the illustration of his so-called pastoral work of these heretics, CMRI said of count as heretics.
Become an adult, teaches your will to follow reason. Here's how it happens. You're a little child, you're at home, you're playing your video games, you're playing cavecraft. You're at home, you're playing your video games, you're playing cavecraft. And your dad or your mom comes and says, son, take out the trash. Son, take out the dog. Son, you left a mess in your room, clean up.
Canon 2319, 1917 canon law, on the bottom it says, Catholic parents, or those who take the place of the parents who know it, they are excommunicated. Excommunication reserved to the ordinary are those of Catholic parents, or those who take the place of the parents who knowingly have their children brought up or instructed in a non-Catholic persuasion. That means not only that, but in regards to influence of this world, you're supposed to separate yourself from that influence. So how can you allow your children to be playing video games? What are those video games about? He makes a statement like this is something permissible, instead of saying do not allow your children to have any access to this, because that's a perversion of their soul and danger of perdition. That's the devil in those video games. That's the kind of pastoral work these heretics are. That's what the beginning of what we said. That's the illustration of these evildoers, what they causing and doing. We are almost at the end. And that's why they are excommunicated. And that's why it's not only that, but about the publishers. Finally, those who, knowing of the censure of books written by apostates, heretics, and schismatics, that includes publication, the principle is there. Read or keep such books without due permission. Canon 23:18. So that applies to that too. So you cannot be suggesting something, or at least imply as implicit in there, playing video games. Your son whom you're supposed to protect from these influences, and so that he is truly Catholic, growing up Catholic, or children growing up Catholic, instead of being subjected to these dangers to their soul. And that's why we have published this today, and that's why these evildoers will pay dearly to God. And so we're almost at the end. So what is the conclusion in this is that when people do not realize that the devil, not only that the devil is causing them harm and trying to subvert their soul, but also that they are in those dangers quite often because the devil is very cunning. He knows how to materialize them, how to bring them to results what he desires, and God is permitting this in punishment of those who are not paying attention, who don't want to convert, who don't want to become truly Catholic, and who disregard his church, who don't want to help his church, who are comfortable in their heretical lives and going to places run by these heretics. And that's why God will be punishing this world and so forth. So the true virtues are supernatural gifts of God given to his souls and produced by them by cooperation with the divine grace, but that happens only to those who are truly Catholic, because God will not grant it to people who are heretics. They can do good in times, but not develop virtues in their soul, because that is, you cannot have a mixture of this in a sense of how they remain as heretics, excommunicated, and at the same time produce the virtuous things that belong to true supernatural charity, for example, or hospitality and so forth. God is not helping them to fulfill that obligation they have, otherwise they would be practicing it. Moreover, they will be very careful what they believe, and they are not. And that should suffice today.